Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG. Welcome to another Cube video. Sorry, the cat really wanted to be a part of this one. Cube Tuesdays are back for 2024. Let's go everyone. Today, we're going to be talking about the most recent Cube update that I've made to my own Cube, why I've done it, and some of the reasoning behind everything. This might look like a little bit of a change, only 15 cards today, but the reason behind a lot of these changes is very important. Oh, you're going. Okay, goodbye. So importantly with this update as well, it's also taking place ahead of a much bigger update I'm going to be making sometime in like January, February, where I'm really going to be looking at the power level of the cube and really adjusting some archetypes in a massive way. So some of those changes have been made with that big next change in mind. Where they're relevant, I will let you know. But basically, the reason for this change here is to try and rebalance some archetypes in my cube, specifically aggro. We've definitely had, some might say an issue, some might say not an issue, where aggro has just been super dominant recently in my cube. I think it got to a point where aggro in one form or another had won like 7 out of 10 cubes, which honestly is a really large number, so it meant I really had to look at it and really had to try and do something about it. Hopefully the methods and the thinking I've gone through can help you if you're in a similar situation or if you need to make some changes to archetypes in your own cubes. So how do you rebalance aggro without completely destroying it? The easiest option is just cut a load of aggro cards and don't replace them. That's not really something I wanted to do because I still want aggro to exist. I just want it to be slightly less strong, maybe slightly less consistent. The other easy option to nerf aggro is to just put more answers to it in the cube. So things like roadblocks for aggro decks, things that stop their early starts, and also things like board wipes, which is like 3 or 4 for one an opponent, which lets slower decks get that foothold back into a game. The third option, and this is one it took me probably the longest to kind of come to terms with and think about how it would really affect the cube, is by making aggro decks less consistent. One of the best things about aggro decks is that they're generally 1 or 2 colors. So when you draft them, you don't really have to worry about drafting lands. You can just take the best card in your colors and go to town with it. Because Magic cards have generally been getting better, it also means spells are getting slightly easier to cast. So there's a lot more like 1 and a white creatures or 2 and a white creatures rather than like white or 1 white. Cards that are easy to cast combined with the initiative has just made like aggro decks splashing other colors quite easy. That's basically meant they're just drafting and playing the aggro deck, which is just like the best red cards, the best white cards, splashing an Orcish Bowmaster, for example, is just really easy to put together currently in my cube, and I don't think that's a healthy place for it to be. So that's the third tool we're going to be using. We're going to be trying to make the just 3-color aggro pile more difficult to come together, and if it does, you have to draft your lands in a way that all the other decks in my cube generally have to work. So with this update, I've really tried to not do the first method, the just cut aggro cards from the cube. I still want these decks to exist. So let's look at some of the answers that we brought in to help the other decks against aggro. So bringing in another board wipe. Shockingly, I didn't have Wrath of God, I had Day of Judgment and Damn in the cube, so bringing in Wrath of God seems pretty easy. I've really enjoyed Mercurial Spelldancer, but the control-y or slowy decks, I think, need Thing in the Ice in my current cube environment, so that has come in. Force Spike is another counterspell that's really good against the aggressive decks, or any deck that's being greedy and just trying to curve out as quickly as possible. Mana Drain could be one of the most powerful cards I've brought in quite a while, but it's another hard counter with a hell of an upside. This one we will play by ear, we'll see how this one goes. If this one is too strong, then it could come out, but I mean, Channel's in my cube right now. Mana Drain is probably about that power level. Deep Cavern Bat is another just great answer, because it can take the 3-drop that's about to kick the hell out of you, or in other matchups, it can take a combo piece, or just another really impactful spell like a Minsc and Boo, something like that. I think it's going to be really solid. Contagion is one I've been looking at for quite a while. Basically, this is the Black Force of Will. You can exile a black card and pay a life to cast this spell for free. What it does is it lets you put -2/-1 counters on up to 2 target creatures. Yes, it is an old card. You would not see this today with the -2/-1 counters. But basically, this is a fantastic way for a control deck to interact with aggro very early in the game. It protects control decks against the most impactful aggro starts possible, so like a Ragavan or something like that on turn 1. In a similar vein, something very good at answering creatures is a card like Arc Trail. This is a card that could be run by an aggressive deck if it's coming up against another creature-based matchup, but is primarily in for the other decks to have answers to cheap creatures in the cube. And then because in my cube, we also have a artifact aggro section, not just a creature-based aggro section, which is also really, really good, we're bringing in Pest Infestation as a good way of answering those spells. The fact it also goes really well with infinite mana, making you an infinite amount of pests, is also very good and is another reason why I'm bringing it in. So I do also have the card Forked Bolt already in my cube. It's like a smaller, littler arc trail. This basically means it's a lot easier to answer 1 toughness creatures, which is kind of a lot of what the aggro deck is putting down earlier in the game. It has meant that this update could affect other decks, specifically like green ramp-based decks. I'm not trying to hurt those decks. So what I've done, just a little nod to this, is I've swapped Llanowar Elves for Wild Growth. Effectively, it's the same ramp style of effect, but Wild Growth can't be killed by Arc Trail or Contagion, so that's why this has come in, a little nod to that, trying to keep those decks solid. So the other way that we're going to try and keep this cube balanced is by making aggressive decks less consistent when you're trying to pull together like 2 or 3 colors. The way I am testing doing that is by making the mana of those decks much worse. So this is where I've tried removing super efficient aggressive cards, things like Odonto Vanguard, Sungold Sentinel, Bloodfeather Phoenix, and Felden Room Excavator, and replacing them with cards which are harder to cast. So things like Grand Abolisher being double white, Leoning Relic Warden, I know not a super aggressive card, but it's goodbye. But it giving the white deck answers to some of the other busted things in the cubes is not going to be a bad thing. And then similarly in red, Flametongue Yearling and Moira Marauder means that I'm hoping it's going to be harder to just get the aggro deck. You're more likely to see the mono-white or the mono-red versions of these decks, meaning there's slightly less cards for them to take during a cube. Specifically, the Moria Marauder coming in, it caring about goblins and orcs, is why I brought in Krenko, because I wanted another Rabblemaster that makes goblins, so that's why Najeela has come out. Krenko is also a nod to something I'm going to be doing in the future, where I'm really going to be changing some of the archetypes in my cube. Like my plan is to make all of Naya care about +1/+1 counters, while also making Jund care about goblins. So I'm going to be bringing in some goblin creature combos across all of Jund, but the mono red version will still be aggressive, it'll just be more goblin themed than a standard cube. Krenko does this along with the Moria Marauder. That could be quite cool. The only other update that I've done is bringing in Atali Primal Conqueror over Territorial Kavu. The Kavu hasn't really done much, and Atali is a really cool card that I want to test. That's why it's coming in, there's no other reason for it. So this is the most recent update to my cube. When I do the bigger one in a couple of months, obviously we'll do a video about it, we'll talk about it. I'll let you know the cool things that I'm testing and trying out. With this shift to try and rebalance aggro, I am very aware that I am dancing around possibly the bigger issue, and that is just the initiative cards are very, very strong. The issue could very well just be that a card like White Plume Adventurer and Seasoned Dungeoneer are just too strong in my power level of cube. This whole exercise could just be replaced by cutting Seasoned Dungeoneer, cutting White Plume Adventurer, cutting Caves of Chaos Adventurer, cutting all of the broken initiative cards from my cube. Meow! But if I'm honest, some of the best games of Magic I've played in Cube have been where people are fighting over the initiative. Also, the initiative does have stuff that cares about +1/+1 counters, which is an archetype I'm trying to bring in. So I am trying to keep the initiative in my cube for the time being. If this update does nothing and aggro just rolls over the next 5 cubes in a row or something like that, or just constantly putting up ridiculous numbers, probably the first step is we cut White Bloom because it's a 3-drop, then we look at the Seasoned Dungeoneer. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. I'm hoping that we can make this stuff work. That is where we are going to end it today. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And do let me know down in the comments what you think of these changes. Do you like them? Do you agree? Are you the aggro player in your cube group who is just furious that I have done this to mine? Let me know. It'd be good to hear from you. But until next time, I'll see you all soon. Goodbye.